Session 36 of the Law of One, and it's now time to talk about the higher self. Let's begin. The higher self is a fascinating concept for us who are in the process of a self-realization or a spiritual path, depending on how you want to see it, because it talks about a higher intelligence that we all have and that is guiding us through the life that we have, our incarnation, the decisions that we make, and how we interpret reality in general. So sometimes it can get complicated depending on how people want to describe it, and at times it can be very simplistic. So my purpose is really to make it in a practical way, at least the way I perceive it within the raw material, and just give a nice concept that can be workable for all of us, and it fits within the model that we have been studying with the Law of One, specifically the raw material. So it's going to be concentrated. This first part is going to be concentrated mainly on those aspects of the higher self and other parts that we're going to see, as we go through, because there are different terms. And that's where I hope I don't get lost, because it gets really intricate with the nuances of the terminology that they use. So I'll try my best to compact it in a way that makes sense and we can understand it, practically. So let's start with the first question that Don had in session 36, where he says, in previous communications you have spoken of the mind-body-spirit complex totality. Would you please give us a definition of the mind-body-spirit complex totality? Ra says, there is a dimension in which time does not have sway. In this dimension, the mind-body-spirit, in its eternal dance of the present, may be seen in totality. And before the mind-body-spirit complex, which then becomes a part of the social memory complex, is willingly absorbed into the allness of the one creator. The entity knows itself in its totality. So let's use one of the avenues I want to create for illustration. We are one being, and I'll repeat this as many times as needed throughout this video. But we are one being, and there is a process of realization of the self, which is really what creation is about the creator knowing itself, and every portion of the creator is seeking that realization, that it is the creator. So there are different aspects. That's what we know as densities, and we all have obviously our analogs of densities, which are our chakras, our energy centers. And at this point, we're talking about the totality beingness of the complex, the mind-body-spirit complex. So this resides in 7th density. Almost 1 step, 1 inch, 1 millimeter, 1 Planck measurement away from the unity with everything. Okay, and this is pure consciousness, everything that exists. Infinity, intelligent infinity. So that is where the mind-body-spirit complex totality beingness actually resides in. That part of closeness to the oneness. So when they say there is a dimension in which time does not have sway, that is the dimension, or the approaching, the closeness to God, to the creator, where time has no way of being perceived, because you're getting close to infinity. So in its eternal dance of the present, which is all that exists, it's the present, there is no time, it may be seen in totality. The mind-body-spirit complex can see itself as a totality. Now the important part of mentioning the totality beingness here is that there is a portion of us that knows itself totally, beyond the higher self even, which we're going to get into. So we're starting from almost God, from from the perspective of God or the creator itself, but one step below, which is still seeing itself as a being in the creation. And it's that threshold between creator, all-seeing everything, the octave, and the complex or the entity that is seeing itself in totality as we approach that. So it's a very kind of abstract way of seeing it, but it is so. That's just our evolution. That is, I would say, now that we talk about evolution, that is the end of our evolution. That the totality beingness is the end of our evolution before we dissolve into nothingness or everythingness, depending on the term that you feel better with. So Ra has more to say. It says, this mind, body, spirit, complex totality function as, shall we say, a resource for what you perhaps would call the higher self. The higher self, in turn, is a resource for examining the distillations of third density experience and programming further experience. This is also true of densities 4, 5, and 6, with the mind, body, spirit, complex totality coming into consciousness in the course of 7th density. So, we have the higher self now. I don't think they mention it here, but I think it's later on where they mentioned that the higher self itself is a gift of 7th density totality beingness. So let's talk about being. This is why it can get confusing. So let's make this as a visualization as opposed to how it really is, and then I'll go back to how I perceive everything in a more unified way that it makes sense. But for us, for the sake of explanation, let's put it this way: we have the totality entity at 7th density, and then we have the higher self in 6th density. The 7th density totality gifts all its knowledge and understanding of the beingness to the 6th density. That is the higher self. And the purpose of this higher self is to help in the programming and guiding of the 3rd density being, which is us. This also happens in 4, 5, and 6, like they said, but let's concentrate on the higher self itself. Where they say, okay, shall we say a resource? Okay, and this gets explained better in the next questions. Shall we say, okay, a resource for what you perhaps would call the higher self. The higher self, in turn, is a resource for examining the distillations of the 3rd density experience and programming. You see, when we die, we go into our higher self, or we communicate with the higher self. We are not separate, obviously, from everything, let alone from the higher self. So it's almost like communicating with our higher intelligence to see what can we do to balance out, to heal the body, the etheric body, yes, that we have at the point which can only be programmed and healed or balanced here in incarnation. So that is direct communication with our higher self. While we're incarnated, and we'll touch on that too here, these two aspects of being disincarnate and incarnate, and how our higher self communicates with us. When we're here, we're also receiving guidance from our higher self at all times. It depends on how much we allow it, because we have free will, and we allow or disallow the higher self to communicate with us. So that's just essentially what they're saying here, because they're describing in essence the question that Don had, remember, about what the mind, body, spirit, complex totality being is. And that's it. 7th density knows it all. 6th density is the resource that helps with 3rd density. And again, it's just different aspects of the same being, because we're all one. It's almost like a string. I like to call it a string or a tendril from the creator coming down on us, which is the polarities of self. That's the north star, the north energy that comes in, whereas the south energy is what's coming out from the logos, let's say, and it's that prana that we know. So it's information that it's distilling out from the north, just to give it a direction. So this is also true of densities 4, 5, and 6, with the mind-body-spirit complex totality coming into consciousness in the course of 7 density. See, this communication with higher self also happens between 4, 5, and 6, of course, as we approach that point in which 7 density is achieved much like we are in 3rd density and communicating with 4 density beings. Just like Ra has their teachers from 7 density, and they teach them, this stuff, what they know, what they need to know for 7 density. It's all an evolution. It's all a process of, how close we get to communication with these. And there's a whole intricate system of how, time-space is arranged. There is a pure time-space, and then there is our time-space as the illusion that we perceive, and then there's space-time, and there's a whole, intricacy there and how it works between the incarnations, because there is an analog of space-time in all 4th, 5, and 6th density as well. So it gets really complex at that point, but that's not necessary to understand what the totality beingness is and the higher self as well. So let's move to the next part. I know it sounds confusing so far, but we're just trying to illustrate something that it's already there and we have access to, but since we're kind of dissecting it, it can get a little complicated, but it really isn't. It really isn't. So let's move to the next question so we get more clarification. And Don says, 36.2, then would the mind-body-spirit complex totality be responsible for programming changes and catalysts during, say, a 3rd density experience of the mind-body-spirit complex, so that the proper catalyst would be added, shall we say, as conditions for that complex change during 3rd density experience? Is this correct? This is incorrect, says Ra. The higher self, as you call it, that is the self, which exists with full understanding of the accumulation of experiences of the entity, aids the entity in achieving healing of the experiences which have not been learned properly, and assist, as you have indicated, in further life experience programming, as you might call it. There's more to say now, and they're going to go into totality beingness. I keep calling totality beingness. I know there's a different term, but the totality complex. I don't want to recite the whole mind, body, spirit complex totality, but that's what they're going to refer to. Now they're talking about the higher self, and Don's question was about saying, okay, well, if this is the highest intelligence that exists in our beingness, then surely that must be the one programming our catalyst. But that is not so. There is a subtle difference between the higher self and the totality self, because, and we'll get to that, there is a difference in how things are perceived from both dimensions or densities. And the higher self is the one, as I just explained, that is assisting in programming with the 3rd density being, us, not the totality beingness. That's a different resource for us. It's a different type of intelligence. One thing you can start to see, so it doesn't get too abstract, is that you are a reflection of all of this. So you have a 3rd density body right here, which is the one that interacts with, social interaction and so on. That is our bodily, manifestation here. Then there is also your higher self right here. You have a higher self kind of analog in your indigo ray, your 3rd eye. So you can begin to see, and it's not like you're incomplete and you need them up there where they are. No, you are a projection of that, only in a holographic, a lower holographic projection of it, or manifestation of it. So you can already see that there is a difference between your indigo ray and your crown chakra, your violet ray, because they're both spiritual. Of course, we're talking about the spiritual complex being associated, with indigo and violet, and that is the shuttle that Ra says, the shuttle to intelligent infinity. So, but there's a difference between the two of them, and that is the same difference between the higher self and the totality self. Let's call it totality self. So, all right. So this slide, or this part of the answer, this paragraph, Ra was explaining that it is incorrect that the totality self is the one involved in the programming of catalysts and guiding and all that stuff. No, that's why from 7th density, as it acquire all the knowledge of everything of the self, it gives that to the 6th density who can manage it. Why is that? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it's very efficient. So that's just the arrangement that we have. So next part, Ra says, the mind-body-spirit complex totality is that which may be called upon by the higher self aspect, just as the mind-body-spirit complex calls upon the higher self. In the one case, you have a structure situation within the space-time continuum, with the higher self having available to it the totality of experiences which have been collected by an entity and a very firm grasp of the lessons to be learned in this density. So here's a clear distinction about the difference between 3 points in a circle. As Ra says, the self has the totality beingness, totality self. I keep mixing, the terms. The totality self. Then there is the higher self, and then there is the 3rd density self, us here. Now, we communicate with higher self. That we know. We've talked about that a lot, and we know it from everything else that we have. If you have watched, obviously, other spiritual teachings and so on, how we communicate with higher self and so on. There is that communication. Fine. We get all our, guidelines and, how to behave, or not how to behave, but what to do in certain cases. I mean, our communication with higher self, it's another topic, but we know that we have that. There is guidance from higher self. And so the totality self is also giving guidance to the higher self, because that totality self knows a lot more than the higher self. It's a repository of all the information that is available, and it's given to the higher self. So the higher self communicates from 6th density to 7th density to acquire this knowledge, much like we from 3rd density and even from 4th communicate with our higher self in the line of succession. Let's call it that way. Is that a line of succession? Probably not, but you know what I mean. So it goes along the line of evolution. And that's what Ra is saying. That is, that's how it works. Available to the experiences which have been collected by an entity. See, when they say in the one case you have a structured situation, I think they are referring to us in 3rd density and the higher self in 6th density. A structured situation within the space-time continuum, with the higher self having available to it the totality of experiences which have been collected by an entity, the same entity, we're all the same entity, and a very firm grasp of the lessons to be learned in this density. Here is a nuance that I want to say, because I explained it in my Spanish channel. Maybe I'll do it here, because I think it's a very it's a very interesting depiction of how all the dimensions work in terms of space-time and time-space. When they say space-time continuum, here's where I'm adding something. They may be referring to the space-time that is not only in 3rd density, but there are space-time analogs in 4th, 5th, and even 6th density. So the higher self may be available, again, to these entities or these aspects of ourselves. So it can communicate the information. Obviously, from 6th density is where we know most. Late 6th density is where we know most. That's where the higher self resides, the late 6th density, right before 7th density. So, it's it may be because also, and I'm just thinking about this now, the reason why the totality being creates the higher self is because from a lower dimension, it's easier to communicate to even lower dimensions. Whereas, from the 7th dimension, it may be very difficult to communicate to lower densities of consciousness like this one. You can see this with the Ra contact. The Ra contact was so difficult because they are in a higher dimension and a higher density, 6th density. So communicating to 3rd density is very difficult. So imagine how difficult it would be from 7th density to 3rd density or the other densities. Whereas the higher self, being in 6th density, can do this, telepathically, of course, and through other methods that I'm really, short brain, to imagine. But it may have to do with that, just the capacity of communication that exists between densities. So, again, not to go too long on this, but they may be referring to the space-time analogs that exist, because we really exist in time-space. Space-time is just a sort of a playground or a sandbox that we create to have experiences and then recollect them in time-space, our time-space aspect, the etheric aspect of ourselves, so we can get all that information, experience, and lessons and rearrange it and, keep playing with the evolution. So I believe that's what they're referring there. But at the very least, they're talking about the space-time here, our 3rd density space-time, where they say the higher self having available to it the totality of experiences which have been collected by an entity and a very firm grasp of lessons to be learned in this density. So the higher self is just sitting, with a book. Let's call it a book, and it knows everything. It knows all the steps that we need to take. It doesn't know everything that we're going to do. That is defined by us here, and our reluctance to go through the path, but eventually all paths leads to the higher self. So the higher self is just browsing. Okay, you made that decision, fine. You rejected this lesson. I'll give you this catalyst. It's almost like a tutor to you. And you can see it that way too. That's why we have free will here. It's free will to reject the path that we're all taking anyways. So that's why communication with higher self is the best thing that it can exist, because it knows the path of least resistance, right? So that's exactly what the higher self is doing to us. And of course, it's natural that we derail from it, just like I'm derailing from the raw material right now. So we can go back, because there's more that Ra says, and hopefully this makes sense. I know it can be confusing, but Ra says finally on his answer, or their answer, the mind-body-spirit complex totality is as the shifting sands, and this is the totality, yes, as the shifting sands, and is in some part a collection of parallel developments of the same entity. This information is made available to the higher self aspect. This aspect may then use these projected probability possibility vortices in order to better aid in what you would call future life programming. So many things that I can speculate here, and this may be due to my ignorance on how all of this works, but see, one thing that comes to mind is that the totality. Think about the perception of life from 3rd density, separation. Then think about perception of life or existence in 4th density, all is love, and so on. We change perception of how existence or the creation is depending on our density of consciousness. So it is not insane, I think, for me to think that the totality beingness, being in 7th density, has to see the creation from a completely different view from 6th density as well. And what is that we know from 7th density? Well, that it is a step in learning the consciousness of the all being, of the one creator. So they are approaching a view of the creation which takes into consideration the whole universe. The whole creation, not even the universe, the whole creation, from almost at the point where, let's call it the brain of the creator, is there. So they're almost seeing everything at once, and this may express the difficulty that they may have as to deal with individual portions of the creator, which is us, as well as trying to program catalysts and so on, because it just becomes so fuzzy. And so this information is made available to the higher self aspect. So the information, the all mindness, I don't know, you can see it as just pure light. of every possible experience being had in the universe is getting to that 7th density being, and that is available. They can see it and they can give it to the higher self in 6th density and say, here are the teachings, maybe, and this is speculation of mine, of the whole universe. The whole universe is vibrating with experience and we're feeling it. So we can plan the path of a 3rd density by giving that information to the 6th density entity, so it can program better. So you see, it helps to see how the level of consciousness, it's almost like say the Buddha who has it's a 7th density being here, basically, where it sees everything as one, trying to deal with somebody who is, in a very animalistic behavior. It becomes really difficult for them to communicate. Whereas, the Buddha can explain to somebody who is approaching the lessons of oneness, who is seeing life, as a unified field and so on, it would be easier. This is why, Buddhism it's such a great tool for people who are approaching these lessons of oneness or are understanding oneness. So I'm trying to draw some analogs here, to make sense of this. Hope it helps. So they say this information is made available to the higher self aspect, of course. This aspect may then use these projected probability possibility vortices in order to better aid in what you would call future life programming. Of course, once that this even higher knowledge or intelligence is distilled down to the higher self, then you can program future lives. So, whew. That was a mouthful. Alright, Don says in the next question, out of the Seth material, we have a statement here. Seth says that each entity here on Earth is one aspect or part of a higher self or oversoul, which has many aspects or parts in many dimensions, all of which learn lessons which enable the higher self to progress in a balanced manner. Am I to understand from this, is it correct that there are, shall we say, possibly many experiences similar to the one that we experience here in the 3rd density that are governed by a single higher self? Is this correct? This is so first of all, I'm not familiar with the Seth material. I know about it. I haven't read it. It's in my playlist to read. So, but I know that it's not as dense and it's not as accurate in terms of, I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but I'm saying that it's not as precise and as informative as is the raw material. I do know that the Seth material was I think it was the inspiration for the raw material, the name itself, because they didn't know what to call it, and they said, well, there is the Seth material, let's call this the raw material. Cool, right? So, but apparently Seth is saying, my pronunciation of English sometimes it's off, but you guys can understand. The Seth material says that there are different aspects. This gets really abstract and esoteric, and this is where I probably want to draw back to give you the simplified version of how all this higher intelligence and all the selves that are scattered all around the creation that are helping us. So the question itself is all about, the different aspects of the self that can be projected and having experiences at the same time. So Ra's going to try to answer this, and I will try to compact it, of course. Ra says the correctness of this statement is variable. The more imbalanced an entity becomes, the less the probability vortices may need to be explored in parallel experiences. So, alright. There are entities which are... First of all, this is how I want to compact it. We can get lost, and I'll repeat this if need. Again, this is what I said I will probably repeat in this video. We can get lost into so many things. Like we can draw on the board, the higher self and the totality of beingness and the 3rd density and then the evolution of the soul and the different aspects and, our lifetimes. And we can draw all of that. And we can also do it with our life. if I want to explain myself, and this analogy it was helpful for me to understand this part. Who am I? Well, I can explain myself as having experiences. Every day I have an experience. So I've had almost 40 years now. You do the math. It would be, I don't know, 10, 20, 30,000 something, approaching 20 something thousand, 30,000 days of experience. So I can explain myself as different aspects. And in each of those days, I can divide myself in hours and minutes and seconds infinitely. So all of that makes up myself. So do I need to explain all of that? Probably not. But there are, it is true that I do have dimensions of myself in past days, which I can call past lives as well. And it can go on and on and on and on and on. So I think this is where in the higher perspective, of course, the higher self may be having different experiences. You can see this as an aspect of, and this is not what they're talking about, but you can also see it in different life incarnations that we've had. Do all of those really matter? Not really. They were experiences. That's why we shouldn't be attached to our past lives. Oh, I was this, I was that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, great. I mean, not to take away from the excitement and the romanticism of, having past life, but really is your beingness what matters. Who you are right now. All of that made you who you are right now, right? So that's what you should be concerned with. So Ra is saying that the correctness of this statement, this is how I want to actually compact it. We are all one being, okay? And everything is scattered, in different fragments of the creation, the creator, experiencing itself. But see this, when they say, the more in balance an entity becomes, the less the possibility that it needs to be exploring parallel experiences. They're not talking about this, so big caveat here, but check this out. The more in balance somebody is, say, if somebody comes here and it's his first incarnation, and it so happens that, had great teachers and it had, great communication with higher self and whatnot, it only needed one incarnation. It's probably impossible in this universe, but let's just say, why not? I mean, everything's possible. It's infinite, right? So this one entity who came from second density, became third density, in one lifetime, it becomes able to transcend everything. And it goes, boom, like the Buddha, goes out of the creation. It graduates from the whole scheme. That is what they're saying, as opposed to somebody who may need thousands, millions of incarnations to learn all the lessons. Some advance really fast, others advance very slow. In the case of, the creation, it doesn't really matter. We have infinite time, right? So, this is why exploring these different dimensions of beingness with higher self, projecting different beings and all at the same time, can get a little confusing into who we are. Who we are is what we are right now. Period. That's it. So exploring all that, can get confusing to define ourselves. There's no much more definition than ourselves than right now who we are. So knowing ourselves and accepting ourselves is what leads us to be the creator, which is really the ultimate goal. And I hope this makes sense, because it really helped me to coagulate all these questions, about different dimensionalities of being and all that stuff, which is great. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but to really concentrate on the now is really what's important, because now is the only moment that exists. There is no time, and I don't mean that there is no time for something. You know what I mean? There is no time. There's only present. So yes, the more balanced the entity is, obviously, the less it needs to have more parallel experiences. Just like I said with the incarnations, one person or one entity may need several incarnations, where one may have one or just a couple of them. All right, next question. Hope this is making sense. Don says, 36.4, do I understand from this then that the higher self or oversoul may break down into numerous units if the experience is required to what we would call simultaneously experience different types of catalysts and then oversee these experiences? So, Ra says, this statement we cannot say to be correct or incorrect due to the confusions of what you call time. True simultaneity is available only when all things are seen to be occurring at once. This overshadows the concept of which you speak. The concept of various parts of the being, living experiences of varying nature simultaneously, is not precisely accurate due to your understanding that this would indicate that this was occurring with true simultaneity. This is not the case. Oh my god, this is confusing even to me right now, and the more I read it, the more it can be confusing. But since we're talking about 7 density, you can see true simultaneity from there as opposed to from here, because from here we have a different conception of time. Time, like I just said, does not exist, and there is the eternal present. So if there is no time, then everything is simultaneous. Everything is happening simultaneous. But we cannot perceive that because we see things linearly. So from the perspective of Don, and let me just reread that one part where it says, see, the oversoul is breaking down so it can have different experiences. Like, everything is happening at the same time, and this is what Ra called true simultaneity, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this is not the case from the perspective that we're seeing it. So I think Ra's answer here is confusing only because they're trying to correct Don in that our perspective of simultaneous things happening is not the same as true simultaneous or simultaneity in our the whole creation perceived from the creator or from 7 density or even 6 density, actually, because we're starting to see the lessons of unity. We're starting to see the perception of everything. You can also you can actually experience this on yourself when you are engaged in everyday life and you're doing one thing and at the same time something else is happening. You cannot perceive true simultaneous actions and activities at the same time. You're taking out the garbage and, you know, at the same time your computer is running something, so you're not experiencing it because you're immersed in the illusion. But when you are meditating and you are aware of what I would call the vacuum, the void, the nothingness, the space as it actually is, then you can perceive that everything is happening at the same time, because you are everything. You are space where everything is included in, and this can get really deep into, you know, what meditation is and the reality of things. But when you get that experience of being, you know, in that state of total blankness, which, you know, it's a very peculiar state, then you know that everything, or you can experience everything at the same time. I'm not saying you can experience the whole universe at the same time, but you know what that means. You know what that feels. So you're saying that is not the case, you know, from that standpoint. All right, it's getting very intricate. Ra says, the case is from universe to universe, and parallel existences can then be programmed by the higher self, given the information available from the mind-body-spirit complex totality regarding the possibility vortices at any crux. Wow, okay. So, the case, meaning the true simultaneity, is from universe to universe. This, their use of the word universe, to be honest, confuses me even more, because we're not talking about universes, like different universes that are creating different octaves. It could be dimensions, it could be experiences or lifetimes, or it could be the person to person. But they say parallel existences can then be programmed by the higher self in the case that there is perception of true simultaneity, say from the complex totality, from the totality self. From that perspective, then things can be programmed in that way because the higher self is distilling that from it. And then for the case of an entity having experiences, then in this is where I would say the universe to universe is the program microcosm that we are can be then used in that way. Again, this is really confusing, in the way they explain it. But see, and let's just reread it and see if we can get something else out. They say the case is from universe to universe. Let's just call that, microcosm to microcosm, us, because we can consider ourselves universes. And parallel existences can then be programmed by the higher self, meaning, different incarnations or different experiences that it may want to have, given the information available from the totality complex regarding the probability possibility vortices at any crux. So the best way I can definitely distill all of this is that the totality self, we can work it out actually from bottom to top. The all the needs that a being may have is seen by the 7th density being, and is then given to the 6th density higher self, in this case, to program the existences. I'm actually reading from bottom to top, to program the existences and parallel experiences that the entity may have. So this is true simultaneity. That's what they're saying. From top to bottom, it's seen that way, and this is happening at the same time. This projection of how could happen. But see, all of this is not necessary. All these different projections is not necessary if one aspect of the being recollects everything and it kind of compacts itself into the lessons that it needs to do to spiral up to 7 density in this case. Oh my God, this is really. I hope I'm making sense, because what I'm trying to do is revert the same being trying to know itself, and it could, it has a myriad of ways of trying to experience itself and acquire that sense of realization, which is really what we're all here for. I don't want this to sound like, we're this is something that we're gonna have to do, when I achieve this knowledge, and with that, this is very complicated just to say the same thing. We're all here to experience true realization of the self, period. Other than that, we're just going into details that are probably unnecessary. So if you are confused, don't feel bad. This is supposed to be confusing. It is confusing for me. If it's making sense, then great. But if in any case, just take it as a reminder of how we're just supposed to keep knowing ourselves. It's the mechanics, the intricacies of how this works. So, all right, let me not linger on this any longer. Don's gonna say, next question: Could you give an example of an entity, possibly one from our historical past, possibly an entity that you might choose if you don't wish to name one, and give an example of how this type of programming by the higher self would then bring about the education through parallel experiences, please? Ra says, perhaps the simplest example of this apparent simultaneity of existence of two selves, which are in truth one self at the same time-space, is this. The oversoul, as you call it, or higher self, seems to exist simultaneously with the mind-body-spirit complex which it aids. This is not actually simultaneous, for the higher self is moving to the mind-body-spirit complex as needed, from a position in development of the entity which would be considered in the future of this entity. Once again, we enter. Don is asking, for an example of, this simultaneous, thing happening. So an entity that is happening, and they say the simplest example is the apparent simultaneity of existence of two selves, which are in truth one self at the same time space. You see, all is one. Let's go back to that. All is one. So that is the true simultaneity that is happening. That is it. That is the true simultaneity. All is one. But they say an apparent simultaneity of existence is two selves, the higher self and us, and the totality self as well. So they say, which are in truth one self at the same time space in this. The oversoul, or the higher self seem to exist simultaneously with the mind-body-spirit complex, which it aids us. See? So we seem to exist at this, simultaneously from our perspective, but in reality, we're just simultaneously one being. This is not actual simultaneous, for the higher self is moving to the mind-body-spirit complex as needed from a position in development of the entity, which would be considered in the future of this entity. See, okay, so in our perception, I'll bring this back to as well. This is not true simultaneity in my memory of my younger self, okay? Even though I am that one self, I am a collection of all of that, and I may be moving to that. In this case, it's working a little opposite. I may be moving to the experiences of my previous self, my younger self, to distill that information to now, because it informs me now. So true simultaneity is me right now, the one being that exists. Whereas, the perception of, am I existing simultaneously with my past younger self? It's apparent, but it's not. And yes, you can say that you are, a trend or a graph or, a line that you can see your past. And this is why, it's false to perceive past as something that really exists. And it gets so complicated. But, true simultaneity is this, the one self. And just exploring that can get us into too much complexity that it's irrelevant right now. So this is how I perceive it, though. Again, this is, if something resonates with you, great. If not, just reject it. I'm doing my best just to try to express how I see this and how I understand this, these concepts, which, again, it's not necessary for communication with the higher self, which is really what we need. All right, Don says, then the higher self operates from the future as we understand things. Oh my God. In other words, my higher self would operate from what I consider to be my future. Is this correct? And Ra says, from the standpoint of your space-time, this is correct. Once again, from our, see how they say, from the standpoint of our space-time, which sees time as linear, yes, the higher self is in the future, because we haven't realized it yet. We are in the process of realizing that we are the higher self and that we exist at the same time, one being. And this is why, see, we have what is called our Buddha nature. The Buddha nature is always here. So we're living simultaneously with our Buddha nature, but we haven't expressed it yet. We are waiting for that. And so the higher self, in our standpoint, where we haven't realized that, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this, we haven't realized that, is, it's in the future as we see it. Because in the future, we will realize that. It could happen right now. It could happen in a day, a year, 5 incarnations, or throughout the whole creation. It doesn't matter, because it's always present. The Buddha nature is always here. The Creator is inside. So it's just waiting to be expressed. And, this is what Ra is saying. I know Ra is just like, yeah, from there, I guess you are correct. It is you in the future once you realize it. But it is. Actually, Buddha nature goes beyond higher self. But anyhow, Don says the next question. In that case, my higher self would, shall we say, have a very large advantage in knowing precisely what was needed, since it would know what, as far as I am concerned, what was going to happen. Is this correct? Ra says this is incorrect, in that this would be an abrogation of free will. The higher self aspect is aware of the lessons learned through the sixth density. The progress rate is fairly well understood. The choices which must be made to achieve the higher self is as it is are in the providence. Let me read that again. The choices which must be made to achieve the higher self as it is are in the providence of the mind body spirit complex itself. See, so development of the self through the different states of consciousness, that comes in handy here. Developments of the self through the different states of consciousness, our energy centers. What was the Don asked? Let's go back. That was incorrect. When said, Yeah, well, the higher self knowing what was going to happen. That is not true, because the higher self doesn't know what's going to happen. The higher self doesn't know how this aspect of his self is going to react to something. It only knows how it should react. It only knows not really how it should. See, words are troublesome. The higher self only knows what are the lessons to be learned. That's what they say. Is aware of the lessons to be learned. It's almost like it has a blueprint of how, I'm gonna get from here, which is third density, all the way to here where I am, and this is the path of least resistance, right? So it's gonna take that and say, this is how I'm going to help you, my lower aspect. I'm going to guide you through this process. But it doesn't know what's going to happen. That is the fun part of third density, and even fourth and fifth and sixth. So the choices must be made to achieve the higher self, as it is, are in the providence. See, I have problems with this, but this really sums it up. I like the part where they say the progress rate is fairly well understood. The progress rate is fairly well understood, knowing that, okay, if my lower self down there in third density already has acquired this knowledge, then I can start feeding him or her this information, that. This is why communication with the higher self is so paramount, but we'll get to that in the conclusion. But see, the more in tune you are with the higher self and realize that, I am that intelligence. And again, the higher self knows that is beyond that, but it's here to guide you. Is that lower intelligence from 7 density, as we explore in this video, is that lower part of 7 density that knows everything and is communicating with 7 density and saying, like, what do I do next? How do I do this? What else is available, actually, is what the higher self would ask to the totality self, in my opinion. So the last part, they say, the choices which must be made to achieve the higher self, as it is, are in the providence of the mind-body-spirit complex. Beautiful. See, the choices that must be made to achieve the higher self. It's not to achieve the higher self, when I go through 4th, and 5th, and 6th. The higher self is here right now because it is you. It's just waiting to be realized. That Buddha nature. Actually, Bodhisattva in this case. But let's not get lost in more terminology. But that is what the higher self is. It's knowing how to achieve that oneness. And it's trying to guide us through that. But it is our choice. The choices which must be made to achieve the higher self, as it is, are in the providence of the mind-body-spirit complex itself. It is our providence. It is our prerogative. It is our decision. It is our path. All right, more to be said with Ra here. Let me see if I can get to more questions before we end this video. Ra says, thus the higher self is like the map in which the destination is known. The roads are very well known. These roads being designed by intelligent infinity, working through intelligent energy. However, the higher self aspect can program only for the lessons and certain predisposing limitations if it wishes. The remainder is complete free choice of each entity. There is the perfect balance between the known and the unknown. Wow, I love that last part. Okay, so like I said, see, Ra uses a better word, which is a map, not a blueprint, but a map. They both work well. I think I'm proud of my blueprint analogy. So they say the higher self is like a map, in which the destination is known. The roads are very well known, but we are the ones who need to carve those roads or traverse those roads. And this is why, when you're guided by higher intelligence, faith basically is what tells you just go along with the road, and see where it takes you. Don't try to know, and see the perfect balance between the known and the unknown comes here. However, the higher self aspect can program only for the lessons and certain predisposing limitations if it wishes. It can program, how the person is going, or the entity will go through the process once again of trying to understand who it really is or what it really is. So the remainder is completely free choice of each entity, us. We program as higher self, and we communicate with higher self, but the rest is our free choice, free will. All right, let's go on. I want to get to a couple more questions. Don says, I'm sorry for having so much trouble with these concepts. Brother, we hear you. But they are pretty difficult to translate, I am sure, into our understanding and language, and some of my questions may be rather ridiculous. No, they're not. But does this higher self have a physical vehicle or some type of vehicle like our physical vehicle? Does it have a bodily complex? And yes, this is correct, Ra says. The higher self is of a certain advancement within 6th density, going into the 7th. After the 7th has been well entered, the mind-body-spirit complex becomes so totally a mind-body-spirit complex totality that it begins to gather spiritual mass and approach the octave density. Thus, the looking backwards is finished at that point. Okay, so does it have a body? Yes, it does. As long as you are here in the creation, you have a body. That's it. Even in 7th density, you have a body. It's just that as you approach, and this makes sense to us, as you approach infinity, then you stop having a body because you are everything. So that's it. You know, I love how they explain though that the higher self is a certain advancement within 6th density going into the 7th. So late 6th density, the higher points of 6th density advancement. After the 7th has been well entered, the mind-body-spirit complex becomes so totally that it becomes totality. I love that. That it begins to gather spiritual mass, which is really our union with the Creator. That it approaches the octave density, which is, you know, where we all concentrate and plan as one our next octave. Thus, the looking backwards is finished at that point because there is no back. You know, there's only unity, and that's why the totality beingness says, "Well, hold on. Before I go over there to that black hole, let me go and send this to the 6th density being that is waiting there to have this information," which is not really a waiting as a, you know, space time. It's just, you know, it's all information flowing through. It's like electricity. Let's put it that way. So, all right. I think we have time for 2 more questions. We'll see. Don says, is the higher self of every entity of a 6th density nature? Ra says, this is correct. This is an honor duty of self to self as one approaches 7th density. Not much to explain there. Yes, all higher selves are from 6th density. Don says, well, let me be sure I understand this then. We have spoken of certain particular individuals. For instance, we were speaking of George Patton in a previous communication. Then his higher self at the time of his incarnation, here as George Patton about 40 years ago, his higher self was at that time 6th density. Is this correct? Ra says, this is correct. We make note at this time that each entity has several beings upon which to call for inner support. Any of these may be taken by an entity to be the mind-body-spirit complex totality. However, this is not the case. Okay. Yeah, thank you for confusing us even more, Ra. Oh, so Ra saying that this is correct, that Patton's higher self was of 6th density. I don't even know why Don went to Patton. Why was that necessary, Don? Let me be sure. We have spoken of certain particular individuals. Okay. His higher self at the time of his incarnation here, about 40 years, his higher self was at that time 6th density. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if all higher selves are from 6th density, all right, let's give you a pass, Don. That question was a little superfluous, I think. But in this case, what matters is that Ra is saying, yes, this is correct. But they want to make a note that, and this is not relevant. That's why I went back to see if there was something. But Ra is just, you know, taking time to say, well, we're talking about this. Let's make this note. Each entity has several beings upon which to call for inner support. These may be taken by the entity to be the mind-body-spirit complex totality. However, this is not the case. See, this is confusing again, because the totality... It's confusing because so far, Ra has told us that, you know, the totality self is not, you know, involved with programming and, you know, guidance and all that stuff. That's the higher self. However, they say that these entities may be taken by us as the complex totality. If we're not in communication with it, and we're only in communication with the higher self, then why are they saying this? Well, my explanation to this is that they see that the totality, higher self, and our entity being here is just one, and there is a straight communication. It's just that, it's stepped down. So it's it would fit better, the explanation that we have so far, if they would have said the higher self, but because they probably see everything as just one being, then they put it that way. So I don't know, they confuse me. But in any case, all they're saying is that there are other entities that are not the higher self or totality self that can help us, which are our ancestor guides, spiritual guides, here even, well, not here, incarnated, but in third density, time, space, all of that, angels, and so on, even Ra itself, Confederation, telepathically, and so on. So this is not the case, That's what they're saying. We don't confuse our angels with our higher self. And I think, or even other entities that we channel, we may channel, I channeled, so on, or whoever. Don't confuse them with your higher self. Very important. So, they finish this question by saying, the mind-body-spirit complex totality is a nebulous collection of all that may occur held in understanding. The higher self itself, a projection or manifestation of mind-body-spirit complex totality. Beautiful. Which then may communicate with the mind-body-spirit during the discarnate part of the cycle of rebirth, or during the incarnation may communicate if the proper pathways of channels through the roots of mind are opened. Alright, my brain is already fried. I don't know how I'm gonna record the Spanish version of this. I'll do my best. Haré lo mejor posible. We'll see. Okay, so I think this is a great way to end this video. Not because my brain is fried, because it is, but also because it really, this paragraph sums it all when we talk about the higher self and all, the journey that we had through the dimensions and densities and explaining the different dimensionalities of the self and incarnating experiences and aspects and blah blah blah. See, we'll take it step by step and then we'll finish this. The mind-body-spirit complex totality is a nebulous collection of all that may occur held in understanding. See, from this perspective, in 7th density, we can see that the creation itself, everything that can happen, is almost held at a point that it's like, my God, all the possibilities. We need to bring this to a lower self, which is the higher self, that can actually put this into context for the even lower selves. So it steps down or allows this information to be distilled to the 6th density being. So the 6th density being very wise and balanced and love and light, can say, oh, okay, so I believe this should be the next step, or this is the best way. I'm humanizing all this, and this is not how it works, but this is how it works, step by step. And once again, these are not different beings. This is you. You have this whole channel of communication, spiritual channel, to distill information from. And so they say, okay, so the higher self is a projection. The higher self itself is a projection or manifestation of the totality complex. Again, it's a different aspect of itself, which then may communicate. See, that aspect, that manifestation, then may communicate with the mind-body-spirit complex, which is us, during the discarnate part of the cycle of rebirth, meaning when we die, when we're dead, we're there, we communicate with higher self and we say, what can we do, brother aspect, myself, me from another dimension? Or during the incarnation, which is now, all of us. If you're listening to me, you're not dead, I would think. And if you're dead, then, hey, hello. And may communicate with proper pathways or channels through the roots. Okay, this is important. See, during the incarnation may communicate if the proper pathways or channels through the roots of mind are open. Remember, roots of mind, I forgot which session was that we talked about that. Session 28, 29. Look up the roots of the mind, because this is very important for you to open those channels, if it helps, of course. you need to have these proper channels, these channels properly open. Otherwise, you won't be able to receive the communication from your higher self well. What does that mean, in essence? And I'll sum it up. If you have blockages with your lower chakras, chances are you're listening to your ego, which is an illusion, and you're not listening to higher self. Period. You haven't opened those channels. Or the more blockages you have, then the less you listen to it. Now, don't feel bad about that. We're all caught up in this, wheel of karma, of lower chakras, and that's fine. Is the more we work on not allowing those chakras to intervene with us, the more we communicate with higher self. And you can see that with the experiences that are coming to you and how you're able to digest them. Maybe your boyfriend broke up with you, or you lost your job, or your girlfriend cheated on you, or whatever. All of this third density dilemmas. And back then it would have been, or it was disastrous. Your life was gone, you were suicidal even. But as you go on, these experiences can come as a daily thing. I'm not saying you were gonna lose your job every day. That'd be weird. But even still, what I'm saying is the magnitude of the experience is lessened as you listen to your higher self and you have faith in the path. So this leads me to the conclusions. You can communicate with your higher self the more you allow to be free from constrictions of the egocentric personality that we develop here, which again is fine. It's a reflection of who we are, and it's a shadow reflection actually. As I talked about this morning, it has to do with the reflection when we project our judgments of others. It's only telling us the shadow of who we are. We perceive that person and we judge that person for whatever reason. That is telling us who we are not. And if we can perceive that, then that is great work we can do to integrate that shadow into us and see how we truly operate, how we truly, see things. If we're able. If we're not in communication with the higher self, then we won't be able to see that, and judging would be just like, what do you mean, that person is not an imbecile? Obviously is an imbecile. Did this and that. You don't understand the person. So the more you can allow yourself to be that higher self here, because that is the point. The higher self judges not a thing. The higher self is compassionate with everything. It has balance everything. Love and light, love and wisdom, compassion, everything. It's really balanced. That is what you must summon here. This is not a forceful thing, of course, but something that comes over time as you confront the lower demons. Let's call them demons, those shadows of yourself that you sometimes may be afraid of not, going into, because I can't be this terrible person. I just cannot conceive myself as that. So you're pushing away the shadow. There is so much peace and harmony coming from accepting that, yes, you are doing that, but you are projecting a shadow because there is a light behind you. So if you can see that and stop, closing your eyes because you're seeing a shadow, and you can turn and see the light that is actually shining on you, and you can say, oh, okay, this is the real me, not the shadow. This is how, it's just one of the many ways, and this is, I'm probably butchering, the whole shadow work and how it's supposed to be, but you get the idea. That is the essence, without going into courses and, going into all this stuff. That is the true, realization of self, is to find out that, none of the expressions that are physical here, your survivability and, your identity of who you are, and, how you belong into groups, and, how you manage people and all this stuff, that's not true. This is all an illusion, and we're playing in the illusion, and we can get caught in the illusion, samsara here, by not knowing that there is love, wisdom, and a balance of those two in unity. So the more we see ourselves from that perspective, and we just embody it. It's not, I love the term Wu Wei, or the concept of Wu Wei in the Taoism, because it shows you that you can't force to do anything. You just allow it to be, because you are that. And that's just being spontaneous too. being very spontaneous in all the actions, and just be the observer. It's the best lesson I can probably give to anybody at this point in my evolution, because I'm going through my own evolution. It's to be the observer of the actions and reactions of your body and of your mind, so you can allow, you know, your true self to manifest and to see, you know, what's actually going on, and to see the shadow so you can see the light. So that's all I got. Hopefully this made sense. It's a very complicated way to approach higher self and to go into the nuances, dimensionalities and all that, but just see it as a whole string. You know, you are that string from the creator down here, and you know, it's not like you need to climb. It's just you are all of it already. It just depends on how you are, where you're focused. If your focus is here on the narrow perspective, you know, of third density, then you are here. That's fine. You know, eventually you'll move up and widen your perception, expand your consciousness. That's truly what it is, expanding your consciousness. You just see, you know, everything as it truly is. You know, the flow of things. So, you know, just see all the session as that. You know, and you have that connection already. If you're watching this video, especially if you watch an hour and 10 minutes of me, you know, rambling on this nonsensical stuff, and you definitely are, you know, in tune with the information that is being distilled from the higher self to you. And remember, there is no, you know, differentiation between me and you. We're all just one being, and this helps also to see that, you know, the projection of the light seems scattered into different photons, but it's just one focus of light. So we're all the same light. And all right, with that, I don't want to keep rambling more. That's it. Thank you so much, as usual, for watching this whole hour. And I have nothing else to say, but I'll see you in the next video.